To the question, whose is Crimea? There is only one correct answer. And it is spoken not only in Ukrainian but also in Turkish. Turkey's President Erdoğan, the eternal backstabber of Putin, is ready to fight for the return of the peninsula to Ukraine.
Turkey does not recognize the annexation of Crimea. This step is illegitimate and unlawful. We've said this since day one territory was seized.
Many people are irritated by Turkey's ambiguity. On the one hand, it's a NATO country and has condemned Russia's aggression, but at the same time, it continues to trade with the Russian Reich and even help circumvent sanctions.
There's China, there are the United Arab Emirates, there's India, but today we're talking about Turkey. From our point of view, this is the most well-established and advantageous jurisdiction route, where many of our objectives can be achieved. First and foremost, this concerns financial settlements. Branches of banks and Turkish banks interact with our counterparties. There are proper regulations, there are algorithms for how to make payments from Russia through a Turkish bank.
But despite the exchange of tomatoes for gas, Turkey is definitely not a friend of Russia, quite the opposite, in fact. Turkey and Russia are strategic enemies. With the annexation of Crimea under the slogan of historical justice, the balding dwarf Führer gave Erdogan the green light to annex half of Russia. Because Comrade Erdoğan is also a well-known history enthusiast and a collector of Turkish lands. Erdoğan even has a map hanging in his office called Greater Turan, on which Turkey includes Kuban, the Rostov region, the North Caucasus and half of Siberia. Ankara considers this the Turkic world, and that Turkic-speaking peoples urgently need to be protected from the Russians.
The capture of Kazan is a very tragic date, which every Tatar knows.
And Tatarstan absolutely and unequivocally must, without delay and without hesitation, be the very first to officially declare, once and for all, its exit from the so-called Russian Federation. There must be complete liberation with the Tatar language in Tatarstan. Independence for the Tatars.
Crimea also ended up on the map of Greater Turkey for a reason, because Crimea was part of the Ottoman Empire for much longer than it was part of Russia. In 1475, the Ottoman Empire seized the Genoese colonies on the peninsula and took control of the coastal cities. The Crimean Tatars with autonomous rights acknowledged their dependence on the Sultan. The Crimean Khanate became an ally of Turkey and its military stronghold on the northern borders. From Crimea, which supposedly had always been Russian, there were repeated raids to burn Moscow. And not just on their own, but in partnership with the Ukrainian Cossacks. In 1521, the Crimean Khan Mehmed Ijirai, together with the Zaporozhian Cossacks, launched a major campaign into the marshlands. The troops reached Moscow, burned the surrounding areas, and took a huge number of captives. In 1571, this performance was repeated. This time, the Tatars and Ukrainians captured Moscow and burned it to the ground.
I like how it burned so intensely, how people are absolutely frantically running around. The fire trucks are beginning to arrive at the scene. Well, people are clearly in shock. Their eyes are practically popping out.
Ukrainian Cossacks and Tatars were always irreconcilable enemies. And that just shows how much both sides were fed up with Muscovy that they were even able to unite against it.
Oh, wow.
Today, the situation is very similar. Crimea could once again become a factor uniting Ukraine and Turkey against Moscow. Despite his geopolitical ambitions, Erdogan has openly stated that Crimea is sovereign Ukrainian territory and that international law must be respected. And there, the answer to whose Crimea it is made absolutely clear.
By official decree of the Presidium of the Supreme Soviet of the USSR, the Crimean region was officially and formally transferred and reassigned from the Russian Federation to the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic in accordance with the official resolution and formal decision.
Turkey has two main objectives: protecting the rights of the Crimean Tatars and weakening Russia's influence in the region. For this, Ankara doesn't need to seize Crimea, which is historically Turkish. On the contrary, Crimea should return to Ukraine. Ukraine must win the war and knock Moscow out. Then, without a fight, the Turks could take the North Caucasus, Siberia, and the south of Russia.
Whether you like it or not, that's simply the way it is after all.
Thanks to the dim-witted, notoriously inept Kremlin geostrategist, Erdogan soon realized that fighting Ukraine for its territories is a lost cause. That's why it's much easier to become an ally of the Ukrainians and together with them, grab even bigger pieces. To be continued. What's most interesting is that, besides the president of Ukraine, only Erdogan speaks and acts tough towards Russia. If necessary, he'll shoot down planes and even seize all of Syria. The humiliation of Russians in Syria is precisely the work of our Turkish comrades. Turkey has in fact carried out a military operation against Russian forces.
Take Syria as an example. All countries will see what it's like to cooperate with us. I wouldn't be surprised if no one wants to at all. They might say Volodym's visit was planned, scheduled for a long time since September, and now the Indians have refused. What is there to talk about with us, with weaklings? This is what happens when you're an idiot and can't hold on to territory.
The Lapotniks were thrown out of the Middle East like homeless people from a heating pipe. In the same way, Turkey could support the liberation of Crimea or even the entire south of Ukraine. Not acting directly, as in Syria and Karabakh, but by supplying weapons, provisions, and lots of volunteers. So to speak, vacationers and the famous miners from Antalya. Thanks to Putin, he came up with that idea too. Ankara does not rule out the possibility of direct involvement by the Turkish army. The second largest NATO army after the US could send its troops to Ukraine to maintain stability and peace. And the president of Turkey clearly stated the criterion for stable peace in the region. That is the territorial integrity of Ukraine and adherence to international law.
Ankara will support the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Ukraine amid negotiations for a peaceful end to the war with Russia. In the further process, Ukraine's territorial integrity is especially important to us. Its sovereignty is also indispensable for us.
European allies are also ready to deploy their peacekeeping forces in Ukraine. But there is a nuance. It was the Turks who showed that they are not afraid of either Putin or his horde. The Turkish army can become not only a peacekeeper, but also an ally in the USSR. Ukraine is now a natural ally of Turkey. Ukrainians have already done what the Turks could not even dream of. They drove the Russians out of the Black Sea. More precisely, they drove them into oblivion. Crimea has effectively lost its strategic military significance. Russian ships literally go there to die. The only region of Ukraine where demilitarization's taken place is Crimea.
We're very lucky that they're so dumb.
Turkey and Ukraine are also jointly engaged in the development and production of modern weaponry. And it is precisely this cooperation that could even become a competitor to the US in the future, considering that America has recently not seemed like a very reliable supplier.
The president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, held a meeting with the head of the company Baykar, Haluk Bayraktar, during which they discussed details of building a new plant in Ukraine and a number of joint projects.
The Ukraine-Russia war began in Crimea. It will also end in Crimea, but only for Ukraine. As for the Russian pseudo-empire, the upheavals are only going to intensify. Who knows, maybe Ukraine might lease the base in Sevastopol to Turkey. Or maybe by that time, Turkey will already have its own base in Novorossiysk.
That's clever you came up with that.
Once again, Russia has united against itself those who have plenty of experience burning and sinking Moscow as well.
I would like to remind you that this video is created for entertainment purposes and contains elements of satire and irony. All facts and events are presented in a hyperbolized or exaggerated form to convey a comedic or dramatic effect. Our goal is not to mislead, but to highlight humor. Please take it with a smile.